Hello and welcome to The Wire. I am Sumedha Pal. We've heard about the biases and exclusion in Indian society, especially against Muslims and Muslim women. But now there is a study putting numbers and analyzing the great Indian divide, especially when it comes to the denial of job opportunities for Muslim women. A study which has been carried out by the LedBy Foundation has unearthed this kind of discrimination. They have stated that for every callback that a Hindu woman gets, a Muslim woman gets half when it comes to entry-level jobs and employment opportunities. Today, we will be having a conversation with those who have authored this study about the discrimination faced by Muslim women, the otherization in Indian society, and the way forward. I would like to welcome Dr. Ruha Shadab, Vanshika Sharan, and Deepanjali Lahiri, who will be sharing the findings with us and pointing out to the kind of discrimination and the lack of inclusivity, especially when it comes to urban spaces and corporate industries who deny Muslim women opportunities on the basis of their religion. And more about the kind of tropes that it perpetuates, the kind of financial and social autonomy that it denies Muslim women. I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking out the time to speak with me. So my first question regarding this study is the findings that we're seeing and the kind of larger political connotations, social connotations that the findings are pointing out to, especially in the context of India, where we're seeing a lot of anti-minority violence, a lot of calls being made to economically boycott Muslims as well. So this question, I think Ruha can discuss this with us, that how do you feel about the findings given the context, and what kind of repercussions are we looking at politically if we were to place this in a larger context?
Thanks for the question, Sameda. The findings are unsurprising, but still really saddening. We did expect to see a higher callback for the non-Muslim candidate, but getting a higher callback that is 2x of the number of calls that the Muslim candidate got was even beyond our ingoing hypothesis or any sort of assumptions that we had. In terms of setting this into the current context, I think this study is really valuable because it helps put quantifiable numbers onto our lived experiences as the community of 100 million Muslim women that we are. Our anecdotes and experiences are incredibly important, but sometimes to be able to move policy conversations and to effect change, you need to be able to show cold, hard numbers. And that's what this study does. In terms of the way we've been received, I've been overwhelmed with the kind of support that we've gotten on this study from individuals that we had no connection with across regions, across religions, from organizations that either supported us or organizations that have now come out and recognized that this might be an issue in their own setup. And then even some policymakers who've been very intrigued by our findings have reached out to us. So overall, the support has been very encouraging and seems like we will be able to take this conversation forward and actually effect change in at least a couple of entities. I think it's really important, again, to start talking about mainstream inclusion of Muslims and Muslim women in the country. We are 200 million people. We are a very sizable chunk of India. And honestly, at the end of the day, the country is missing out. There is a complete waste of talent. What our study shows is that two equally competent women do not have the same result or success. And what this essentially means is that we are missing out on talent as a country. And to meaningfully move the needle on female labor force participation rate, or even the kind of growth rate that we want to see for our economy, we require the active inclusion of Muslim women.
Absolutely. And it is very important that you've pointed out that there is this need for inclusion, but we're consistently seeing in terms of the numbers that your study is representing, it points out to a completely different reality and a lived experience, as you mentioned. And so just to point out towards the kind of time it took, just the kind of methodology it took to be able to study this, if one of you can explain that to us, that would be great. And also about just the fact that, like you mentioned, about the political context, about the political relevance of it as well. I mean, how do we place this in terms of the numbers, the key findings, as well as the methodology that it took to point out to this reality?
I mean, in terms of the methodology and the amount of time it took, we spent quite a lot of time conducting very exhaustive research, right? Again, as Ruha mentioned, like there's a huge population of Muslim women in India, right? Accounting for a large sample size to be able to give us data that is statistically relevant, right? We had 1,000 jobs that we applied to, had two very symmetric resumes. These two profiles were very much like on the upper end of a profile that may exist coming out of top colleges. And like in order to ensure that it was the names that were getting the calls and not the profiles, halfway through the methodology we even switched the names on the profiles just to see if for some reason there was just a preference towards a certain profile, right? And despite all of this giving them the exact equal footing, right, we still saw there being like almost a 50% net discrimination rate. And as Ruha has said, that basically looks like, putting it into context, what it may look like for a woman who's just coming out of college, a Muslim woman, is that for every callback that say she might be getting, a contemporary who's Hindu is going to get two callbacks, right? And that's kind of what we found. Aside from that, we have other qualitative findings looking at what this looks like over regions and over different industries. But what we did find is that there were no industries that did not show a significant degree of discrimination. It was not like we saw any industries showing to us like a very tiny bit of discrimination, or even one that was below like 30%, right? All of the industries we saw had a huge um, disparity between both Priyanka and Habiba, who were our two candidates. But in terms of, I think, the connotations of this politically as well, I mean, it's just a sense of exclusion, right? We have heard about how there's discrimination in the workplace, but there's very little discussion about why that discrimination is happening. Why do we have these biases? Why do we treat certain communities a certain way? And a huge reason for that is because some of those individuals from marginalized communities, like Indian Muslim women, are purposefully being left out of these spaces, right? And without their inclusion, it's very difficult to have a like have an important and very a very like exhaustive discussion about what diversity looks like in the workplace. Why are we not having enough Muslim women in higher positions? Why are we not hiring enough women? Like this exclusion is basically self-perpetuating, right? And that's kind of what, and we think that like just this lack of financial agency that causes for Muslim women, that also translates into lack of like social agency, you know, the ability to participate politically. All of those things are linked to the ability to be independent economically.
Absolutely. So there's this intersectional nature of oppression and this cycle that then results into the lack of social agency, like you mentioned, and financial agency. And it also perpetuates the stereotypes and the tropes that have been popularized, be it in pop culture or be it in media narratives. So I think that this is very important. Deepanjali, if you can tell me about more, findings of the study, as well as to understand the kind of industries as well. So the impression that I'm getting is 1,000 jobs were applied to. So what were these industries? If you could tell us more about the findings and the key points, that will be great.
Sure. So just to dive a little deeper in terms of the way, we approached this, was we said that we'd create these two same profiles with just different names. We'll apply to 1,000 entry-level jobs, and we were very particular that we would focus on entry-level jobs, because we said that that's really the gateway to employment for young Muslim women at this stage. In terms of the industries, we said that there are a few jobs that we would focus on. So, for example, we had roles in HR, social media, digital marketing across industries. So we didn't really focus on just one industry. We said across industries, across regions, we'll apply to these 1,000 jobs through platforms like a Naukri or a LinkedIn. But in terms of numbers, we applied to 78 industries. And that's what, the data collection that we had eventually. We applied to 78 industries across 4 regions. Of course, there being a larger skew towards north and the west of India, because there are those many jobs just available in those in these regions. But that's in terms of, where we applied to, but our focus really was on entry-level positions. Our resumes were built on entry-level positions as well.
Yeah. And in terms of coming back to Ruha again, in terms of this kind of discrimination, which is very systemic, it is very significantly embedded in our social systems, in our employment systems as well. So we've seen examples wherein Muslim families have been denied apartments in residential buildings, to the calls for economic boycott. Now, how do you see this as an important step in terms of theorizing this discrimination and theorizing this exclusion? Because we've not seen and we've not come across, at least in recent years, this level of data collection or this theorization, which then becomes an important step. So how do you see this study as a link to these political and social discriminatory practices? I think your mic is muted. Yeah.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
I also want to reflect on why we did this study to begin with. And what you mentioned, say, not getting houses on rent, being forced to live in parts of the city just because your religious identity wasn't letting you live in the other part of the city, which might actually be closer to work or better for work. These are just some anecdotes of a lot of our lived realities. And I can go on and fill reams about personal anecdotes. This story itself is something that I and my brothers have faced, my father has faced. It was really about being able to, again, quantify these anecdotes and leverage this data to be able to have meaningful policy conversations, not just with government stakeholders, but also with companies. So what I envision this report to be able to support us with is the next step. And the next step is something that can be taken by individuals like you and I. It can be taken by the companies that you work at. And it can also be then taken by researchers such as Vanshika and her peers. And I'll break that down step by step. For individuals like us having these conversations and even reflecting on how many Muslim women do we see around ourselves and why don't we see them? What can we do? Having conversations, reflecting and asking these difficult questions of ourselves is really important. The second, when it comes to companies, I think this movement towards gender inclusion in India right now offers us a very unique opportunity to really bring in the conversation of intersectionality. The last thing you want to do is include women in a way that promotes the same kind of class, caste, religious, regional, language, or income barriers that we already see in the way the world is structured today. So being able to ask ourselves, what do inclusion policies look like, which makes sense for India, right? The largest religious minority group also has some of the lowest socioeconomic indicators. It just makes perfect sense to hardcode this in our inclusion policies. And finally, in terms of research, you mentioned that a study like ours hasn't been seen, at least in recent times, for sure. So having more research that focuses on understanding the root causes of the lack of visibility of Muslim women will, again, create stepping stones to guide dialogue. What we've uncovered is not the reason, but it is definitely one of the reasons that makes it much harder to be an engaged citizen as an Indian Muslim woman and be financially independent. Yeah. And that's what we hope this research to do, is to support all of these players in being able to take the next step. I can also give you one simple example of how we already started seeing its effects. And this happened when we came out with the interim results a couple of months back. The results were very similar to what the final results were. And I was discussing this with a CEO of a very large company in India. And he said to me, Ruha, thanks for showing this to me, because honestly, if you put a Priyanka and a Habiba in front of me, my hand would automatically go to Priyanka's. And this research makes me pause and think about that. And I think maybe that's our primary audience, are the people who have good intentions, but this implicit bias, just because of the kind of environment we've been raised in, has gotten coded into the way we function. So it's also about addressing that implicit bias in people who hold access to doors and opportunities and help them make decisions that are then more inclusive and representative of the citizenry of India.
Absolutely. And what you've pointed out looks like a more symptomatic sort of effect of multiple underlying causes. So do you feel that this kind of hypothesis which was postulated, do you think that that got vindicated? Do you think that at a certain level when you were uncovering the findings, do you feel that, okay, we knew this and yes, we were right? So what do you think were these underlying sort of factors? What do you think are these current underlying factors which are then leading to, be it a hiring bias or be it social discrimination or be it exclusion at multiple levels?
We went into the study with a very scientifically sound, unbiased question, which is to see if there is any change or difference in the job callbacks between a Muslim and a Hindu woman in India with the same qualifications. And yes, the final results clearly show that there is a net discrimination rate. In terms of some of the more surprising findings as well, Samira, which I would like to share, is there was one aspect which is, okay, there is a difference in job callbacks, but a nuance appeared as well, which is how do recruiters reach out to these women?
Yeah.
And we saw that there were more personal callbacks for the Hindu candidate. She received around 40 to 50% more callbacks in terms of phone calls than the Muslim candidate. And now, why is this happening, right? Step one would just be familiarity. We are, as a species, we have a tribal mindset, and we get attracted or we agglomerate as communities that we see or feel a sense of familiarity with. And sometimes we have to actively shake ourselves out of that. The lack of exposure to Muslims in your educational school, in your office spaces, makes you feel less familiar with them. And then when you are in positions of making choices that affect hundreds, thousands, maybe lakhs of people, that familiarity manifests itself as a bias. And perhaps that is what is happening over here. Other factors such as stereotypes all seem to arise from this lack of familiarity, because effectively what we did in our study, we presented two profiles that were academically, professionally, the exact same. So everything else that happened after that in terms of decision making was a manifestation of biases, of stereotypes, which themselves are a result of perhaps a lack of familiarity, a lack of awareness and education.
Yeah, and otherization, of course. So I want to ask both Dipanjali and Vanshika instead, when you look at findings such as this, being women who do not belong to the Muslim community, how do you understand that? Do you feel that there are these inherent stereotypes coming from coming from the kind of social environments that we are conditioned in and we are born in? And how do you reflect on these, given the fact that there is a privilege of your identities, and given the fact that the oppression and the intersectionality of this oppression does not affect Hindu women in the same way as it does given a Muslim woman?
Yeah, I think I can speak primarily for the academic community, right? I think especially like coming from an academic community that's fairly liberal, progressive in general, fairly diverse environments, you go into those spaces not really thinking much about religion, right? You don't think of that discrimination as existing in your environment, but as rather something that's happening on a more societal level, something that you want to combat, but something that you don't daily see, right? Because you probably are friends with Muslim women. You probably exist in the same environments. You probably talk about the same things, have the same interests, right? So you never really think about what things are going to look like when you enter the real world. And especially like when we were starting this research and I was creating the two profiles, I named the Muslim candidate after one of my classmates, and her name was Habiba. And at the end of the research, considering that I had linked my number to Habiba's profile, every single time that Habiba didn't get a call back and Priyanka did, I felt this disappointment on a personal level as well. And just to put that into context, that's disappointment I'm feeling for something that does not exist. But as for an individual who's trying to enter the workforce, is trying to earn a living for themselves and perhaps their family, that level of disappointment is far greater, far more disappointing, and something that makes you lose hope and not want to participate at all, right? And just having that context in my mind, I think it made me understand a lot better that discrimination exists in every facet of life. It does not matter how progressively I treat my contemporaries. I'm still a part of a system that will continue to advantage me over them. It's like just that understanding of, sure, we may have the same GPA, we may have the same CV, the same opportunities, everything during college, but at the end of the day, that's not going to translate into us getting the same jobs. And just that security that that gives me and the insecurity that that provides, say, someone like Habiba, that's just incredibly disappointing, and something that I think anyone in my position or any Hindu individual has to talk a lot more about, and has to face that there may exist these biases may exist within ourselves as well. Like, simply because you may think that you're progressive does not mean that there isn't this implicit bias in your head that makes you think that a Priyanka may be more competent than a Habiba.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I also do want to just jump in. And before I answer that question, I'll give you a bit of a background of my career. So I've been in corporate India for 13 years before I joined LedBy Foundation. In my 13 years, I've been a hiring manager for about 8 years. In those 8 years, I have never hired a Muslim woman. And I have worked with one Muslim woman. Now, why that is so significant to me today, and why this research is so devastating for me today, is because I realize that, like me, there may be many others. And I would imagine that I am somebody who is progressive. I am somebody who has good intentions. I do care about diversity. But did it ever occur to me before this research, or before LedBy coming across, or before me joining LedBy, did it ever occur to me that I had hired zero and worked with one Muslim woman? My answer to that is no. And which, for me, that's it's embarrassing, it's shocking, and it puts me in a position of just questioning who I really am. So, like Vanchika said, so as a Hindu woman today, or any woman from another community who is a majority community, I urge you and people like me to pay attention and just look around you. Look around you in your organization, look around your friend circle, look around you in where you live, right? And realize that you are at a position of privilege. You are at a position which is othering you and disenfranchising the Muslim community in this case. So for me, this is really personal. And I would like to really, with this research, urge people in positions of power. And, there's this statement that has been playing in my head, which is, if it's with great power comes great responsibility. And if you are in a hiring position in an organization, you are in a position of responsibility, and you have to really pay attention to who you are hiring for the better good of the organization. And there is enough and more research out there that proves that organizations that are more diverse have a higher, eventually have a higher profitability rate as well. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think I'll just record the introduction and the closing links separately, if that's fine. If there is anything else you feel that needs to be added, please go ahead, and anything that you feel is not covered in this conversation, I'll do a separate written report with the numbers and with the text and excerpts from the report. But if there's anything that you feel needs to be added, I think we can add it here.
To what Dipanjali said, we need to reflect on not just whom are we hiring, but who are we not hiring as well. Who are we letting through the door and who are we not? And then ask ourselves this very difficult question about why. It's really important to reflect as a nation about what can we do cohesively and together to meaningfully help 1.2 billion people move forward. And it's not an easy task. I know a lot of people have their intentions absolutely right. All of them might even be, a lot of them might be Dipanjali pre-LedBy with the best of intentions, but just not having taken that moment to reflect because nothing has nudged them or urged them to do that. And we hope that this study will be that nudge, especially for folks who hold access to important opportunities and doors. I also want to speak a little bit about the limitations of this study.
Sure.
We recognize that this study uncovers a barrier to employment and access for Muslim women. There are a number of other obstacles as well. We also recognize that we were comparing a Muslim candidate to an upper caste Hindu candidate. The results might differ if you use a lower caste persona as well. And we've also marked out some more limitations in our full report that's available on our website. But I also want to recognize that this is an academic endeavor with its academic limitations as well.
Great. So I'd just like to thank three of you. Thank you so much for taking out the time and sharing these insights with us. And we will be continuing this conversation, and we will be reflecting more on the report as well as the other things that you've mentioned. So yeah, I'll just end this here. I'll just end my formal conversation here, and I will record an introduction for this separately and an end link as well. But I just really want to appreciate all three of you and many congratulations on this report. And I will be sharing, we'll be editing the video, I think, by tomorrow. So this should be out, and I'll be filing my text copy as well by tomorrow. So I'll be sending all those links to you, but I just really appreciate all three of you taking up the time.
Thank you, Samida. And Paji must have told you that the full report is on our website.
Yeah. I saw that, and I'm just on my way to sort of look at it completely and then take out excerpts and data and file it. So thank you. Thanks again. I would like to thank each of you for taking out the time, for speaking with us, and for pointing out these very important and crucial insights when we have a conversation about minority rights in the country, when we look at the intersectional nature of oppression, which targets and oppresses Muslim women. Thank you for joining us.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.